Welcome to this video, created from a live webinar we broadcast on June the 30th covering trade and transaction reporting, what good can come of it. This is part 2, which covers data quality and controls, global regulations, and a poll: has trade reporting affected data quality in your firm? Our speakers today are Brian Lynch, CEO of Riskfocus, Steve French, Head of Regulatory Services for Triana, Chris Barnes, Writer and Analyst for Claris FT, and Gavin Dixon, a Senior Executive and ex-COO of Credit Trading at BNP Paribas. We hope you enjoyed the video.
Yeah, so moving on, I just wanted to take a step back on the impact of global regulations, because the other thing that's clear is when you say reporting, it means different things to different people in different areas, basically. So I just wanted to use this slide to look at the global state of regs and then focus in a bit more on reporting. It is cross-asset. So when we had MiFID 1, it was securities and some fixed income there, and now it's truly cross-asset and it's truly global. So if you look at the bottom, we've tried to highlight the areas in which there's some stability in the reporting regimes, shown in green. So ASIC and Canada, actually, there's another 7 areas
What's the meaning of the colours? So green.
Well, green it's stable. So when this slide was put together, as in it's done, okay, you put a tick. You can basically put a tick on it. But if you look at the different jurisdictions under Canada, there was originally 3 that went live. There's another 7 or so now. So it's in flux once again. So you put it to bed as a bank or buy side, and now you're constantly reviewing the state. Dodd-Frank Act, pretty stable. ESMA, there'll be the level 3 coming up. Hong Kong's pretty stable right now. But then underneath, there's the Swiss regulator, money market statistical reporting, which is another point on Brexit, whether that ever included us, certainly not, and whether it would ever include us again. REMIT, which is energy. Then the Bank of England's SMMDC, which is sterling money market data collection. SFTR, which will be repos. And these are all up and coming, right? So the point here is you hear reporting and you immediately think very sort of introspectively on what impacts you, but globally it's many different jurisdictions and it's many different asset classes. The other key thing is the regulators looking at the money market statistical reporting, and the Bank of England looked at what was being reported under EMIR and what was going to be reported under MiFID, and decided that the T+1, end of T+1 requirement was not good enough, so the reporting for one of those actually is before 7 AM on the morning of T+1. So it's the same more or less data, and it also impacts different trading parties. So the point I'm making there again is it's more information, it's sliced and diced differently, and it has to be submitted differently.
And it's like Gavin was saying, that the piecemeal approach to this is what everyone's taking a step back from and looking at now. We spoke to a French bank a couple of weeks ago who said they'd done an inventory of sort of external reporting, regulatory reporting of some shape, form or the other. They came up with 190 discrete obligations that they had to meet. So it's much more than what we've even got on the picture here in terms of trade and transaction reporting. They're looking at that entire gamut and saying we just cannot be profitable and have as many silos, doing this as we are today. We have to rationalize it. There's just no option. I would just state on the DFA front, that's definitely not stable, because we've got SEC, SBSR coming up next year now, which is way later. You got historical backloading of 6 or 7 years worth of trades, depending on when they actually implement it.
This fragmentation of the regulatory requirements and the regulatory timelines. I mean, the banks have started out with one thing in mind. It was, let's appease the Fed because they want some information. Then the regulators have really all kicked in, but none of them are coordinated. They kind of talk to each other and then they go off in their own little directions. Institutions, whether it be bank or buy side, just can't cope with the timings, the differences, the number of fields. It just becomes a regularly jigsaw puzzle where you don't have all the pieces.
So we try and draw it back to, like, the topic was to try and sort of figure out the positives of this, and it's sort of self-prophesizing, I guess, that this has created the need, but I'm also hoping that, it becomes the catalyst for innovation. You look at blockchain coming out, and blockchain clearly is a huge buzzword, and everyone's out there figuring out what impact blockchain would have. Well, it's that thirst for solutions that's going to make blockchain happen quicker. And I know, I know Steve, your next folks are actively working on blockchain solutions around the data that they currently control through these processes, and hopefully that really is a driver of that innovation.
Yeah, it's a good point, and there's different ways with the new technologies. But for us and for a lot of people, actually looking at the right way is to appreciate that it is new, and to actually see how you can apply that, but not to all areas, and not just to look carte blanche, what can you replace wholesale, but as we show on the next slide, actually what we call the regulatory stack, and you can cut this many different ways. But one of the areas where some of the new technologies lend themselves are just on onboarding. So on the subject of data, it's easy to look at data as just the trade and transaction data, but onboarding of client static data, for example. And if you look at indirect clearing, and we're still waiting for the RTS on that, there's some interesting points on Brexit there, but there's probably a bit too much for one conversation today. But and Bill, you might have some comments on this, but on indirect clearing, who can have access to the data when? And some of the new technologies lend themselves very well to that sort of thought process. And given the Brexit scenario with the UK, will a UK clearer be able to get access to that data at all if they're offering those clearing services? So there's plenty of discussions around that. But what this slide shows in general is the points that Brian's making, basically. There's many elements of a trade or transaction processing during the life cycle that can be looked at individually or can be looked at monolithically, but the sort of more open thinking now is to look at them independently, look at what you've got in-house, look at the other third-party vendors that you're using, and do a best of breed to give everyone the same sort of outcome, but to actually weave these services together using APIs and the like to make sure you get to the same end result. So
if I could just jump in, I think it's important also to not just focus on the endpoint. When we look at the research and the analysis that we're able to do at Claris of the public data for Europe, for example, is so aggregated at a meaningless level that it's impossible to draw any conclusions. But of course, all of the firms going through this reporting process, internally they have the private data at a transaction level. Therefore, all of the research, all of the analysis that we're able to do on the Dodd-Frank transaction level, on the public data, is entirely possible on your own private data stack. And that's exactly what this enables you to do, basically.
yeah, it's a good point.
And what I was going to, given the theme of this is benefits, imagine this giant stack on the left you have to build, in other words, to get your data out. All the way through that, you would hope there's a big arrow going left or right that's back to the rest of the firm that says, hey guys, we've looked at your data, there are issues with it in content or format or timeliness, whatever it is. But you would think that in the theme of this webinar, that by building this feed, you find out things about your data that you didn't know before.
It's a constant cleanup in the end.
Yeah.
That's perfect segue to your next poll, because that was one of our questions was, have the additional processes that we've had to implement around trade and transaction reporting had a positive effect on data quality? When we saw the first results out of the trade repository reconciliations, I mean, the matching rates were horrific. 3%, which is incredible considering, as you said, Bill, we've been matching confirms for a long time now. There shouldn't be a good reason why there should be such a big disparity. So has the focus on
But isn't that driven by the creation of even more static data in terms of more ways to refer to your counterparty and more ways to refer to the security or instrument you've traded, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this whole new range of static data that people may or may not have implemented properly, and it's created this reconciliation nightmare.
I think that's right. Having to express your internal data in a new way has meant more transformations, more mappings. But I do think it's the canary in the cage for the fact that back in each of these individual silos, both within organizations and across organizations, the quality of the data and how we represent these things has been very inconsistent, you know. And so does having an LEI now, does that improve our global processes? The fact that we really do have a single identifier that can identify counterparty for the first time, you know, across the globe.
It should do, yes.
It should do. And does MIFIR forcing ISIN as the standard identifier for all products? Whilst there's clearly a lot of concerns about that, but you know, after it's bedded in, and does it ultimately result in a better identification of products and transactions? Then
a little bit of question mark around the concept, yes, a question mark around whether ISIN's the right one, and seems to be some more work going on trying to look at that, especially around the interest rate swap market. But the concept of having global standards of reference data for securities counterparties is perfectly sensible.
You remember the Red Code project from Credit?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that, you know, we've been doing this for a long time.
Exactly.
So there's the results.
All right. So again, you know, more on the positive than the negative, but nothing hugely.
I think it's an iterative process. I mean, you go back and if you ask that 6-12 months ago, I think you'd be further down the scale. And so it's an iterative process. Once they find a problem, hopefully they fix a problem, and your total data stack gets better and better as you go through it. And hopefully you change your process as well to ensure that you don't have the same problem again. But so it's going to take time before you get further up that scale, but you should improve.
We're talking at a conference in a couple of weeks' time about data quality assurance, and certainly that's something we're seeing more now than we ever have before. So we're seeing a good number of organizations where the person we're talking to in the organization is not a project manager who cares about MIFIR or EMIR, but is the chief data officer of the organization. And you know, their perspective on it is, okay, we've got to take this opportunity now with the mandate I have as the CDO to go right back in our stack. And so our validation engine, for example, that we sell into the end game of trade and transaction reporting, they're looking at that and saying, no, let's move that way up. Let's move it right up to the point of capture. Let's not validate on the way out. Let's validate on the way in and fix it throughout the stack. So people who are implementing those kind of programs and have a chief data officer who has a real, you know, sort of mandate behind him or her are definitely going to see better outcomes.
I think, Brian, it's like you said, you used the word, and you said once it's bedded in. So if you wind the tape forward 20 years, you can just imagine some new kids on the block here saying, tell me again, Brian, so you had all these different identifiers. You used to have what's an ISIN, Brian? What's a QSIP? You know, what is this? And it would just be unthought of, right, that we operated in that way. So I think saying it's an advantage now is, and we saw that on the chart.
Paper, so
we're
making progress.
But I
Not
think
really.
in 20
Look
years'
at all the
time,
printouts we have here.
in 20 years' time, you're going to look back and the benefits, or maybe in 5 years' time even, and you're going to see a lot more benefits than we can even recognise today or think about today.
Yes, my daughter asked me, so you actually had a telephone that was attached by a wire to the wall? It's like, yeah, it's true, they existed.
Well, the first mobile phone was a brick, you know.
Yeah.
Things have progressed.
So just to sort of reinforce the point here. So and Brian's touched on this. It's on the slide we're showing now. Is if you look at the stack, we've just turned the stack the other way, and Bill made this point, and hopefully there would be arrows coming out of the stack. Feeding back into the firm, and that's the main thing. We've actually got this flagged with exception management in red all the way down, because you want to know as early as possible, again as Brian said, what the problems are. And the sort of analogy we use here is you want to be able to say to the regulator, this is what we've done, and maybe this is what we've done as an industry, not I hope I got it right, can you come and tell me I didn't in 10 years' time? That's been the modus operandi today, and nobody wants to do that anymore. So again, we're showing here, I know the focus is on reporting, but the static data, so it's LEIs or the UPIs we've already touched on, and then you quickly tumble into SSIs and the legal docs. People are reviewing how they handle those sorts of things. And then when you get to the outputs, it's not just TRs and SDRs, it's the European central banks for some of these regulations, it's the national central banks as well, and it all has to be reconciled coming back the other way. And then in the top right, from an operation perspective, you need to be able to see all of the events associated with a single trade or transaction. And as Chris knows, whether that's voice executed and going through a CEF, at the time of pre-trade, the UTI starts coming into play. You get a token, and the token becomes the UTI afterwards. And then some voice trades are put through a CEF. Again, it's the CEF's responsibility, definitely in Dodd-Frank world, to actually start generating those processes and hanging on to them. And it remains to be seen the approach under MiFID and MiFIR with the MTFs as well. But that's another key point. It's getting earlier and earlier in the actual process, even though it could be T+1 reporting.
But I also think that the analytical phase should start earlier and earlier in the process as well, about what you do with this data. So pre-trade, when you've got a client asking you a price, you should know at that point what your market share with that client is, because you follow through your private data into the public data. More importantly, you know what your hit and miss ratio is as well. All of this stuff 5 years ago would be once a quarter and based on surveys. Now it can be actually based on real data. And that for me is a massive part of this stack that now it's built. You need to be able to extract the value from the data.
It's a good point that a lot of what we've shown looks like a typical giant systems build, operations, back office sort of project. But in fact, by having good quality data in this real-time sense, surely risk managers, credit risk managers in the front office in terms of limit management should be in a better position to, as you say. I don't know, do we have a perspective of what the front office think about all of this?
The front office perspective generally is compliance, 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 right? So are we...
The typical large bank front office is, not my job, it's yours. But I think that attitude changes over time as well, because I can't remember who made the point, perhaps it was Chris actually, that things are moving further up the chain towards execution, that if you've got to have quality data all the time. So, I think your average trader of 5 years ago isn't the same person stroke mentality as the average trader of today, because they've had to change their job a lot more as well in terms of thinking about the type of collateral they get, the market share, to be able to create a decent price.
Yeah, culturally, I mean, they get it now. You're definitely seeing the tools being built so that the questions can be asked right up front at point of trade, and people can decide whether they're going to execute on a transaction based on their ability to clear it, to margin it, to report it, etc. And I remember, it wasn't that long ago where you would get a call and say, look, create a spreadsheet to model this transaction because we're doing it. In fact, we've done it. Here's the terms. Make it work. And that. I'm pretty sure that we're seeing a lot less of that, if at all.
Well, even CCP basis is relatively new in reality. 12, 18 months ago, it was there in reality, but nobody really priced it in. Now it's a given. So.
Yeah.